And that's the procedure of going live. It was pretty simple, really. You just hit the button that says go live. So welcome one and all, boys, girls, ladies and gentlemen, super intelligent shades of the colour sky blue pink. However it is you might identify, we really don't care. You can identify however you like. My very special guest today is Dr. Suresh. And for those of you that have missed the background, here it is. I attended the Carnivore Live Collective event, which I spoke at along with a bunch of other people in Adelaide very recently. And one of the speakers there at the end of the day, the brilliant Bradley, the wonderful Bradley, played some excerpts of an interview that Suresh and he had some time ago, whenever that was. And a number of us sitting there on the speakers panel on that day were somewhat concerned by what it was apparent that Suresh might have said. So rather than bag him for that, what we thought we'd do is we'd invite him on the show, because he is a friend of ours. We are all trying to achieve the same things and actually talk about it in a constructive way. Invite him to present his case in full rather than in an edited version. And then I'm sure there'll be some things that we can discuss. The topic is this phenomenon that has been observed whereby a number of people purporting to be 100% carnivore and consuming no exogenous carbohydrates to speak of are returning A1C values above where the allopathic community might like to see them, perhaps. And as such, that's an interesting topic, a very important topic, and I believe it's something that we should talk about. And as such, that's the invitation. So I sent Suresh a message saying, okay, I heard what it seemed like you might have said based on the edited version of what you might have said. I'm not actually going to agree with you. Nonetheless, let's hear it in full, and then we can deal with it in a constructive way. So I'll shut up and stop talking, and you can give us your case. Give us a bit of the background of your own diet. Where are you now? What happened? All of that leading up to it.
Sure.
And then tell us what it is basically that you said to Bradley.
Absolutely. Well, Bart,
yeah,
thank you for inviting me onto the show. Hopefully my audio, everything's okay. Some people are saying it's a bit quiet, but thank you for inviting me onto the show. I really do appreciate you reaching out and giving me the opportunity to perhaps discuss this. I think it is a really important topic. I think this is certainly a phenomenon that is being observed in some people, and we'll come back to who we see this in a little bit later. But some people are talking about it, and I want to say, first of all, that I'm here to learn. I'm here to explain what I think may be happening and what I think is going on, and how this might be an issue. But I'm also here to learn, hopefully from yourself as well, so we can have a constructive conversation today, and hopefully everyone else can learn as well. So basically my background, I've been a doctor for how long now? I graduated in 2010, so 14 years. I've been in the medical profession for another 7 years, starting medical school. So 22 years now I've been in the medical profession, which is crazy to me. Just turned 40, that's crazy. And most of that I've been just doing standard allopathic medicine. Of course, it's the standard conventional medicine. Prescribed medications, diet, who cares, just you get sick and die, and here's the medications, this is how you be healthy. But, a while ago, I realized, of course, that wasn't necessarily the best way of treating people. And so started my journey. As with everything, it always starts with a personal health journey. Always, anyone in this space that's doing this, that's broken free of that mold, some people call it a jail, have had their own personal health journey almost always. And mine was just the standard, just morbidly obese most of my life, heading towards type 2 diabetes. I was kind of pre-diabetic. In America, I would have been pre-diabetic. England, I was pre-diabetic. Heart disease in the family, high blood pressure, all of that stuff. So, it was really just a downhill for me. And eventually I decided, that wasn't really going to be the best way to approach this, and maybe I should make some changes. Eventually came across low carb. That really helped a lot. And then, like everything, I couldn't stick to it. Did keto, that worked really well. Couldn't really stick to it. Intermittent fasting, that worked really well. Again, couldn't really stick with it. I'd always find the loopholes. Basically, I'd always be that loophole guy. And I think that was really just food addiction, sugar addiction, maybe food addiction, definitely. If I was seeing myself as a patient, as a doctor, I would probably diagnose me with binge eating disorder. Maybe not now, but certainly in the past. And so none of those things really ever truly helped. I don't think they helped me to get healthy, maybe lose weight, but not healthy. And then I came across Carnivore. A couple of years ago now, I heard Dr. Chafee talk at the Low Carb Down Under 2022. And yeah, that really just kind of changed my life, I think, for the better. And at that point, I had honestly given up trying myself. Not given up with patients, but given up trying. And because it was too hard, to keep doing this yo-yo backwards and forwards. And so I came home to my wife and said, hey, look, I've heard this doctor talk about it. I actually heard a patient a couple of years prior to that came in and said, look, I want to do this crazy diet called the carnivore diet. And I just was like, dude, you're going to die. Like your cholesterol, think of your cholesterol. You're going to die. Like, this is crazy. And he just basically said, no, like, you're my doctor. You're going to see what happens. You're going to do it with me. You're going to see, you're going to monitor. And so I agreed reluctantly, because I didn't really want anything to do with it at the time. And I saw the amazing changes with him, but I couldn't believe it. My mind was still in that kind of allopathic jail, so to speak, of just, no, like, I see what's happened to you, but no, that's just like, you're a fluke, you're a weirdo, like, that's just, that, can't happen. It physically can't happen. So then I kind of just put it to the side. And then I heard Dr. Chafee talk, and I thought, actually, there's a doctor here talking about it now. And at that point, I didn't know Ken Berry. I didn't know you. I didn't know Sean Baker. I literally knew nobody on YouTube. And so I tried this. I went home to my wife and said, hey, what do you think about this crazy diet? Like, I'm really unhealthy and I've kind of given up. And she was like, yeah, look, you're fat and you're unhealthy anyway. Like, you've given up, just, and she's lovely. I love her to bits. We're still together. But she was brutally honest. And so I said, look, let's just do it. I did it and just immediately found the benefits of the carnivore diet, immediately. But the really big difference there, I'm conscious of time, I'm waffling a bit, but the big difference there was I stuck to it. And it worked, and it helped my sugar addiction pretty much go away. It really helped my food addiction. And we can talk about a little bit of maybe why that happens and how that happens as well. I think it's a dopamine issue, but that's maybe a separate topic. But it really helped, and so I stuck with it. And then after about somewhere between 6 and 12 months, really noticeable at 12 months, probably started happening around 6 months, if I'm honest, retrospectively, though I don't know for sure. I started to notice that I just wasn't quite feeling as good as I used to on the carnivore diet at the start. 4 kilogram brisket sounds nice.
Awesome.
I'm getting distracted by the meat. Haven't had breakfast yet. And I started to feel not quite as great. And then over time, it started to kind of gradually get a little bit worse. I still felt good. Way better than I'd ever done before, but just not quite as great. And it was going downhill. My bloods were starting to go downhill a little bit. And I know you're going to shake your head, but a lot of those issues I was seeing, I started to see similar to Paul Saladino, what he talks about. And so I thought, okay, well, he's talking about this as well. Like, maybe this is a thing. Maybe I'm like Paul. Maybe carnivore doesn't work for me, etc. But I was also starting to see this with patients as well, coming in and doing amazingly to start with. But then suddenly down the line, maybe that 6 or 12 month mark, just not quite doing as well as they were. And then the blood tests going off a little bit, including A1C. And so I kind of thought, okay, well, maybe carnivore is great short term. Maybe it's not great long term. Maybe let's change it up a little bit. So listening to Paul Saladino, perhaps wrongly, I started to go down his route, added in the carbs. I know you're shaking your head. But look, it's all a journey at the end of the day. And I was having some similar issues to him, saw some patients having similar issues to him. And I didn't want to be stuck in an echo chamber in just the mindset of, no, carnivore's it, and who cares how I'm feeling? It doesn't really make any sense. So I thought, let's make a change, added in the carbs, and instantly felt better, immediately felt better. And those issues I was seeing on my blood tests, like testosterone going down a little bit, sex hormone binding globulin going up a little bit, they instantly, almost overnight, corrected. So that kind of said to me, okay, well, maybe carbs have a benefit here. And started to add more and more carbs back in. And eventually gained about 15 kilos in about 3 months, which was not very nice, but was an important part of the journey. And so since then, I've been backing off that, going back more towards the carnivore side. And basically now I'm pretty much back almost on zero carbs again, but typically around maybe 20, 30 grams of carbs. And I notice when I drop below that, maybe 20, 30 grams, depending on what I've been doing in the day, I start to get issues back. So things like cramps come back, just start to feel not quite, it's hard to explain, just not quite as good maybe. And if I go too high, I start to get issues again, putting on weight and so on. So that sweet spot for me personally seems to be around 30, maybe 20 to 40 grams of carbs a day, perhaps. But I was also noticing this with patients, that they were also having very similar effects. And a lot of the long-term carnivores, zero carb, were having issues on their blood tests, similar to what I was experiencing, similar to what Paul Saladino was talking about. Whereas the more relaxed carnivore, so there may be 20, 30 grams of carbs a day, occasional carb refeed, occasional non-carnivore foods, for example, wouldn't experience these things. And they also, I was also seeing, a big one was small dense LDL. So small dense LDL, I was noticing on the zero carb carnivores was 100% just going up. So lipid subfractions that I fairly regularly do for my patients, because I think they're really important, to really break down that cholesterol profile, rather than just looking at the LDL, of course. And even the triglyceride HDL. I mean, I know you've spoken about it, Ben Bickman speaks about it, this poor man's insulin resistance test, poor man's lipid subfraction. I'm of the mindset of, why not do the full test if people can afford it? It's not too expensive here in Australia. It's about $100. And so a lot of my patients were opting to get that done. And I was seeing on the zero carb carnivore, the very, very strict carnivore, it was getting worse. So the small dense LDL particles were getting worse. So LDL 3, 4, 5, 6. No, I've never seen 6 or 7, but I've certainly seen 5. And 100% of my zero carb carnivore patients, LDL was, small dense LDL was getting worse. Of the ones I had a data set for, so not just a single result, of the ones I had at least 2 results. And look, this is not a randomized control trial, of course, this is anecdote, but I had around 15 to 20 patients, to look at. And it was pretty striking. It was 100% of these people were getting worse in terms of their small dense LDL. But I wasn't seeing this on a relaxed carnivore. I wasn't seeing this on a non-zero carb carnivore. And I wasn't seeing this on keto. They were all getting better. Their LDL particle size was going up, large, buoyant, fluffy LDLs, their small dense LDL was going down. But I was seeing this on strict carnivore. So I was, hang on, what's going on here? Why am I seeing this? Is this a problem? And of course, we know small dense LDL is a big risk factor for cardiovascular disease. So I also started seeing other patterns with my patients, the zero carb carnivores, their glucose going up, their A1C going up, which is the main context of today. But this also seems to be associated with other signs of metabolic dysfunction. So I was starting to see triglycerides creeping back up again, liver function like ALT creeping back up again, gamma GT sometimes going up again, and things like cortisol going up, DHEAS, dehydroepiandrosterone sulfate going down, testosterone going down, sex hormone binding globulin going up, all basically signs of, in essence, a stress response and potentially worsening metabolic function. So it wasn't just a single marker I was looking at. I was looking at multiple markers here. And it was a pretty striking pattern that the zero carb carnivores I was seeing this issue with, yet the non-zero carb carnivores, I wasn't seeing this at all. And that to me was really very interesting. Add to that, then people were often clinically, within themselves, symptomatically feeling inevitably worse on a long-term zero carb carnivore diet. Initially great, and then eventually getting a little bit worse. And then when they added some tiny bit of carbs back in, often feeling a lot better, that led me to think, well, maybe actually carbs have some benefit here. Which leads me then to the A1C and the glucose. And when I say carbs, I mean like 10, 20, 30 grams, not 3, 4, 500, like Paul Saladino and the government advises us. And certainly not bread and pasta. I would say those clean carbs, like maybe dairy, perhaps a bit of fruit here and there, nothing too much. And so then, glucose going up, A1C going up, this made me think, well, if there's no, I know what people are saying, that A1C going up on carnivore is perfectly fine because we're carnivore, so it's okay. But without presenting really any evidence of that, other than just saying, well, we must be okay because we're healthy, so it must be okay. Fasting glucose going up also didn't really quite marry with the line of, well, if A1C goes up because red blood cells live longer, why does fasting glucose go up? And is that a problem? And also, why is it associated with this kind of metabolic dysfunction, or what appears to be a metabolic dysfunction? And why does it go down when you add a little bit of carbohydrates? Why does fasting glucose go back down again? Why does A1C go back down again when we add a little bit of glucose? So to me, the whole thing just doesn't really add up a great deal. And, the null hypothesis I think we have to come back to is raised glucose is bad. We all kind of know this. And so why are we saying that a raised glucose or a raised A1C on carnivore is just good? Because it must be good because we're carnivore. To me, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And so I question that narrative when nobody's really presenting, at least me, I've not seen anyone really giving any real evidence as to why this is a good thing. Does that make sense?
Okay. All right. Very good. Let's go through the main points that I took notes on as you were speaking there, Suresh, so that we can deal with what you said, I guess, point-wise, in the best way that we can. First of all, you spoke about LDL, small dense particles, as being a risk factor. My response to that is, please indicate the name and journal in which any paper whatsoever has been published at any time, cause and effect to establish that claim in any way, shape or form.
Cause and effect, no, because there's no randomized control trials. And of course you know that.
Right, because
there is a very strong association.
Hang on, risk necessarily, Suresh, is a cause and effect statement. It has to be.
Correct, fine, yes.
So, right, LDL, neither LDL nor cholesterol nor any subfraction of the lipoproteins have ever been shown, cause and effect, to play any role in the etiology of any disease process of any kind whatsoever. Is that correct or not?
True.
Right.
But then neither things like diabetes. So diabetes has never been proven.
But we're dealing with it point-wise, so let's deal with the LDL1 first, which we've just done. Okay, so what you're saying is, yes, Professor K, you are right. This has never been shown to be a risk factor. Okay, fantastic.
Fine, yes.
Good.
I'll admit that,
right.
Yes.
Good. Right, number 2, you spoke about the A1C going up in folks who are on ostensibly a close to zero carbohydrate diet, i.e. one not containing any plant materials to speak of. Because we all know there is some carbohydrate inherently in meat.
Very little. I mean, the meat that we buy from the butchers, for example, now, or the supermarket, it's been sat around for a long time, and there's negligible glycogen left in that.
So ostensibly,
a fresh kill
you're once again agreeing with me that there is ostensibly no carbohydrate to speak of in meat and animal fat, mostly.
Correct.
And as such, what you're suggesting is that a person consuming a diet which is basically completely devoid, to all intents and purposes, of carbohydrates, seems to be associated in your observations with an elevation or a tendency to elevate the A1C.
Correct.
Is this a universal finding or is it not?
For my patients, it seems to be, yes. I don't know about the broader community, of course. I know this is a widely held point that people say that some people go up on it. I haven't seen other influencers mentioning specifically who this is happening for, so I can't speak to that. But for my patients, my observations, yes, this is a zero-carb carnivore issue.
Okay, all right. Anthony Chaffee claims to be ostensibly zero carbohydrate, and I believe him. Why would he lie? I am not, so I'm not going to use myself as an example. I consume a similar amount of carbohydrates to what you're telling me you do, actually. around about somewhere between 20 and 40 a day would be about what the regimen I'm on and have been on for some time. Okay. He tells me he doesn't do that, and I believe him. He also tells me that his A1C is not elevated. So there's an N equals 1 anecdote for what that's worth. Okay. Secondly, in your discussion with Bradley, you stated that you have never seen any evidence whatever to support the idea that a lot of carnivores are suggesting, which is, well, our red cells live longer, probably, and as such are more likely to show a higher level on the A1C test than someone whose red cells don't live as long. Is that correct?
Correct.
Have you still never seen any evidence to that effect?
Not any compelling evidence, no.
Okay, I too wouldn't say compelling evidence. Have you seen any inference whatsoever that could reasonably, perhaps, in your mind be used to assert that it's actually quite likely that a person who does not consume any carbohydrates may well have red cells that live longer?
Actually, no. And I was researching prior to this, interview, because I know, of course, this was going to come up, and I still couldn't find any studies looking at, certainly carnivore. I mean, there's basically zero studies, of course, with carnivore. I couldn't really find any studies, even in keto, or even particularly low-carb diets, demonstrating that red blood cells do actually live longer. Whilst this could happen, admittedly, yes. And I know people like Paul Mason have spoke about reticulocytes maybe, changing, and this could indicate red blood cells living longer, admittedly, yes. I'm still yet to see any evidence that says this actually does happen. I'm also yet to see evidence that A1C living longer naturally would otherwise increase, red blood cells living longer would naturally increase A1C. It could happen, absolutely. And there are studies demonstrating that when red blood cells have a shorter lifespan, that they do tend to show a lower HbA1c level. But these tends to also be in people with hemoglobinopathies, which may be a confounding factor, of course.
Sure.
But also they're saying that shorter A1C lifestyles have a lower A1C, and then saying that, well, that means that longer living red blood cells have a higher A1C, but that's not necessarily, again, shown as, I've not seen any research that actually demonstrates that beyond around the 100, maybe 120 days average red blood cell lifespan anyway. Up to that point, I'm not aware of any studies that have looked at it beyond that lifespan.
Okay. All right.
If you know them, I would love you to send them to me, because I would love to know.
Well, I will do after this discussion, but I can also share a few things with you now that are of interest in that regard. There are one or two leaps of faith here, perhaps, and if you think anything I have to say here is completely unreasonable, please do sing up. However, let's have a look at the first of these. Which is this paper here. Oops, there it is. And the leap of faith here is that this is a paper that considers the lifespan of red blood cells in patients with type 2 diabetes. And what it found using a carbon monoxide technique to estimate the breakdown of red cells, and thus to use a regression sum to work out what the likely survival time was of the red cells in those individuals, that the difference was on the order of 18% shorter lifespans in those with diabetes type 2. So that's interesting, isn't it?
So shorter lifespans, but what was the maximum lifespan that was actually measured?
In the so-called healthy matched pairs, in this cohort, on that occasion, the survival time in those individuals was 103.6 days, plus or minus.
Right. Which is within the standard.
Absolutely.
Within the standard 90 to 100 days. This is what I'm saying is studies that people are saying suggest red blood cells live longer, HbA1c goes up. They're using data to say that shorter lifespans are lower. Therefore, longer lifespans are higher.
Right.
But that's
So,
not what this
yes.
study is showing.
So that's why I said the leap of faith here is that, okay, those with diabetes, there is an
I don't know
inference
if we
here of
can-
shorter lifespans.
I don't know if we
hang on a
can
minute.
make a leap of faith, though. I'll let you finish.
That the leap of faith there is that it is not impossible that
No.
red cells are living longer in those with better blood glucose control.
It's certainly
What
possible.
we don't have is the evidence that it is so. I agree with you. However, lack of evidence is not evidence of lack, is it? And what we need is
Correct.
the study to either test that hypothesis and either confirm or refute it before we can wholesale dismiss it as that's just rubbish. Am I correct in that regard?
You are correct, but if I may,
Of course, absolutely.
I think taking a leap of faith is, and I 100% agree with you, that absolutely if red blood cells live longer, then they could, and I maybe incorrectly said when I spoke to Bradley that wouldn't be the case. I've since changed my position on that after further research. If red blood cells live longer, then yes, A1C could go up, and that is potentially evidenced or demonstrated by a shorter red blood cell lifespan with A1C going down. The problem there that I have is this leap of faith. I don't have a problem with the leap of faith saying that, well, maybe A1C, maybe red blood cells could go up in terms of lifespan. And maybe then A1C could possibly go up on that. The issue I have is that I think we need to come back to the null hypothesis here, which is that raised A1C is bad. Because I'm not aware, and maybe you can tell me otherwise, Bart, I'm not aware of any evidence anywhere in the world that suggests that a raised A1C is in any way beneficial and otherwise not harmful.
Right. Have you seen any evidence in a carnivore population of individuals with very tight blood glucose control that an A1C at 5.7 or 5.8 or 6 or 6.2 is definitely a problem?
I would say that there's certainly, when it's associated, and I've seen the association, A1C going up, almost invariably associated with other markers of potential metabolic dysfunction or signs of chronic stress.
Okay, well, let's
So
deal with
I would say
potential
yes.
markers of, because we've dealt with potential markers of already in this discussion, haven't we? I.e. potential markers of so-called risk of heart disease, i.e. small, dense or
Right.
large, fluffy LDL, which is absolute errant nonsense.
I disagree with that, but carry on.
Well, it is nonsense, because if you want to make a cause and effect claim, risk, then you need the evidence that there is a cause and effect relationship. And if
Okay,
you want to say
but-
this is associated with that, then I'm going to say, fine, it may well be associated.
Yep.
In the same
But
way that the
association,
sale of
but-
ice creams at Miami Beach is associated with sunburn that day, isn't it?
Or shark attacks, absolutely.
And shark
But-
attacks as well. Ergo, to stop the scourge of shark attacks, what we must do is
Ban
outlaw
ice
the
cream.
sale of ice creams. It's ridiculous, isn't
Absolutely.
it?
Absolutely,
It's
of
not
course it
science,
is.
is it?
But
Right.
we can't discount everything that is an association, because, I mean, again, to my knowledge, there's never been a randomized control trial that says, okay, we'll give you diabetes and then we'll see if you increase your risk of heart disease.
Well, you can't
Yeah,
get
we
that past
know.
ethics.
Well, exactly. We know that there's an extremely strong association. And I think at some point we have to say, well, if the association is really that strong, okay, yes, it's not causative, of course, because it's an association. It's not actually causative. But I don't think we can just discount everything saying that it's not proven to be causative, that there's not a randomized control trial. Because you and I, of course, both know, you just said, there's never going to be a randomized control trial for everything. You mentioned Dr. Chafee earlier. I've heard him say, there's no randomized control trial for wearing a parachute jumping out of a plane. Doesn't mean it's not a bloody good idea to wear a parachute.
Number one,
We
I
don't
would
need
never
a
jump out of
randomized control
plane.
trial.
And I'll tell you why we don't need a randomized control trial is because the mechanism of death there
It's obvious.
is absolutely
Yes.
established and predictable on every occasion with no variation whatever.
Yes,
i.e.
but-
gravity is a thing, gravity does exist, and the gravity will cause you to be attracted to the Earth at a rate of knots, building up to terminal velocity, and the sudden stop when you hit the ground is a thing that will kill you. No question.
Yes.
That
But
is
what
not
you're
so
talking
of
about
an
there,
A1C sitting at around about 6,
No.
is it? In a
But let's
carnivore
say
population.
let's say diabetes, for example. diabetes, we know the mechanisms by which it might influence heart disease, but it's never been shown to cause heart disease,
Right.
And what you're saying there is essentially, okay, there's mechanistic pathways. We know that for small dense LDL, for example, as well. But we also, at some point you have to say, well, this association is so ridiculously strong that at some point you have to say, well, we can never actually prove it because it's not a randomized control trial, but there's so much association here that at some point we have to just accept that maybe this is a thing. And I'm not aware of any evidence that A1C going up is of any benefit to anybody. And we actually just have evidence of harm broadly across the population. So I think the leap of faith to say that A1C going up is okay, when it goes against that null hypothesis of it's not okay, I think that's a problem.
All right, so if I present you with a case study of a client of mine who I spoke to several days ago, who presented to me, and I did some calculations and whatever else, and I determined that his body mass index was in excess of 35. Would you diagnose him as obese?
That would meet the clinical definition of obesity, yes.
However, that would be a massive mistake in this case, because he is a
Probably.
very large bodybuilder.
Yeah.
With absolutely no body fat on his body to speak of, in fact. So the clinical definition of obesity there is erroneous.
Correct.
So
if we're using the BMI
clinical
35,
definition
yes.
of A1C at above 5.7 or 6, depending what country or territory you're in, that is also erroneous if you apply it to a population who are carnivore entirely and thus have very tightly controlled blood glucose with very few excursions away from the mean value of their blood glucose. Because at the end of the day, the damage is done when the blood glucose is up well over 150.
But what are you really kind of basing that evidence on in terms of, saying that there's no risk to these people?
I didn't say there's no risk. I said it's inappropriate to apply a blanket prognostic view of someone's A1C without considering what their diet is and ergo what their blood glucose area under the curve looks like if you map the thing out using a CGM, for example, because there is a difference between that and that. Isn't there?
Sure,
massively,
of course there is. And the area under the curve is, of course, the important thing there. But let's maybe then talk, if I can, Bart, about fructosamine.
Yeah.
So fructosamine, of course, isn't associated in any way, to my understanding, at least, with red blood cell lifespan. And I don't regularly measure fructosamine, so I can't speak overly to it, but I have done it a couple times. And again, on those zero-carb carnivores, this is only a small population. Now we're talking 1 or 2 patients maybe. I've seen it go up. So fructosamine has gone up, which is suggesting that their area under the curve, as you say, is higher. But that's nothing to do with red blood cell lifespan. So why is their fasting glucose going up? And why then are we assuming that this is safe, that this is okay, when glucose levels are so tightly regulated in the body because it's so basically toxic? Why are we then saying, but this is fine because, well, we're carnivore, so it must be okay? That's the part that I have an issue with, is this assumption that it must be okay.
Okay, so how is it different from an assumption that it's not?
Well, because, again, the null hypothesis is that glucose going up is inherently dangerous because it's very tightly controlled within the body and it's associated with metabolic dysfunction. And then when you see it associated... So if it was tightly
controlled, Suresh, why would it go up?
Well, that's my question to you, is why is it going up on the zero-carb carnivores and no one else? Why is it not going up on perhaps you are right?
There are several potential explanations which cannot be dismissed. One of which is that those red blood cells might just be living longer. We are yet to dismiss that hypothesis. So that's one.
That wouldn't affect fasting glucose, though, or fructosamine.
Why not?
Why would it affect fasting glucose?
Well, because at the end of the day, what are the factors that affect the level of glucose in someone's blood?
Well, the amount of glucose they're eating, the liver, fasting insulin levels, gluconeogenesis, glucagon, all of these other hormones. I'm not aware that red blood cells are involved in that particularly.
However, when we're talking about A1C, which was the topic that we were talking about, that absolutely is tied up. So that's one explanation for the A1C.
Correct.
In
But that
terms
doesn't
of fasting
explain
blood glucose, what
why
data
glucose
have
goes
you
up.
what data have you got that suggests that there is a meaningful or problematic increase in the fasting blood glucose universally in everyone who does not consume carbohydrates?
Well, all I can speak on is my patients that I've seen. And again, look, this is not a randomized control trial, of course, and this is essentially anecdote, but it's observation. It's, it's what I've observed. But this is again observed by, widespread, influencers out there talking about A1C going up on carnivore and glucose going up on carnivore. So it's clearly not me that just experiencing this with my patients.
Okay.
And what I'm saying is it's not just the fasting glucose. If you look at the A1C and say, okay, well, that goes up on higher red blood cell lifespan. Okay, fine. Let's just assume it does. Fine. Okay.
Well, that was one of a number of potential explanations, yeah.
That doesn't suggest why the fasting glucose goes up.
Right.
And I think, again, we have to come back to that null hypothesis.
Well, I
If red blood
alluded
cells,
to and invited you to give me a list of reasons why the fasting glucose might change from one value to another value, up or down, and you quite eloquently gave me a list of multiple variables that can affect someone's blood glucose, all of which are under the control of the body's homeostatic mechanisms, are they not?
Correct, yes.
And does the
Correct.
human body function according to a set of genes that have survived at least 3.8 thousand million years, and probably much longer
Correct.
than that, and as such probably know
Correct.
what they're doing much better than an allopathic medical community that's existed in its current form for
Very true.
a very short period of time, who are doing things like imposing threshold values inappropriately on things and making prognostic views
Correct.
on the basis of markers.
Maybe that's
you also were invited to tell me about your symptomology earlier on, and you said, well, I just didn't feel quite right. Well, what is that?
Well,
Suresh?
I can explain. So my libido was going down, my energy levels were going down, my sleep was getting disrupted, my stress levels starting to go up. And look, all of these could be any number of factors, absolutely, of course.
Great.
And as I said, this is not
good and
a
accurate
randomized
records
control
of your
trial.
food intakes.
No, not absolutely all the way through. No,
Okay,
correct.
so ergo, we're probably never going to get to the absolute bottom of it, but there are a number of things we could guess at. We could suggest that perhaps your protein intake was too high for you and not for anybody else, for you, perhaps.
Maybe.
You can't dismiss that if you don't have accurate
No.
food records, so that could well have been a problem. Tell me, did you eat any organs to speak of, and if so, in particular liver, how much of that did you eat?
Not very much. Very
How much?
occasionally. Probably less than 1 gram a day on average, I would imagine.
Right.
I
And could that
literally
potentially have
every couple of
contributed
weeks,
to the
maybe at
problem?
most.
Could
I
that
doubt it.
potentially...
1 gram of liver a day?
Well,
I
that's
think very
speculation, isn't
unlikely.
it? Well, I might agree
Yeah,
with
but
you.
at some
However, it's not
point
impossible, is it?
you have to say no. But at some point you have to say, look, okay, we're splitting hairs at some point.
Sure.
Can I bring it back a little bit?
Is Anthony Chafee lying about his A1C and his fasting
I
blood
don't
glucose?
know. I don't know.
I don't
I'm
think
certainly
he
not
is.
going to accuse
I
him
don't
of
believe he would
lying
be.
about that. But I haven't seen his blood results, so I don't know. But maybe we can bring it back a little bit. You mentioned there about the human body, evolving for 4.5 million years and knowing a lot more than, of course, allopathic doctors. And look, that is, of course, 100% true. Right. But maybe that's a good time to talk about meat in the wild. So if you eat meat in the wild, if you go out and do a fresh kill right now and you eat that meat, it has some glycogen in it.
Sure.
So a strict zero-carb carnivore diet is not a natural human diet. So your suggestion, if I may, is saying that
all humans at all times have eaten their meat immediately. They haven't tried to preserve it ever, and they haven't kept it for any time
sometimes they would have. Probably most of the time they would have. And there was also availability of seasonal fruit, berries, occasional mushrooms, random bits of honey, etc.
Sure.
I'm not talking, again, levels of Paul Saladino, but more than zero. And so your assertion that the human body is perfectly fine on zero-carb carnivore because it's been doing it for millions of years, actually, no, it hasn't been doing it for millions of years at all. It's been doing probably
you just
close
said
to, well,
that I said that.
That
and
was
I
the
have never
implication.
said that, not ever. I have never said that in my life, Suresh, not once, ever.
That was the inference. Or at least that's how I inferred it. But that's the thing. My point is here, a human evolutionary diet is not a zero-carb diet. Not 100% zero carb, never ever eating a carbohydrate. It's not a natural human diet. And so we're in a state now with a zero carb carnivore diet long term. We're in a state where we're not eating a natural human diet anymore. Albeit we're close to, yes, but we're not actually eating a natural human diet. So now we're outside of the realms of a normal human physiological process, in my opinion.
In your opinion, yes, okay, fine.
Yeah.
You're entitled to an opinion, of course. Do you have any evidence that your opinion is backed by anything other than what you've just said?
No, I do not.
No. Okay, right. So I guess that's the point on that one. Can you tell me physiologically what the exact requirement for carbohydrates is in the human physiological system in terms of how many grams a day must we consume in order to be healthy, as evidenced by
0.
any kind of science? Right. 0 still. Because gluconeogenesis is a thing, isn't it?
Correct. But
And if your body
again,
decides that the level of glucose in your blood needs to be 5.7, 5.8, 5.9, 6, whatever it is, around about that value, let's come back to the question I asked earlier that you've already answered so that you can answer it again in the same way, hopefully, which is there any evidence in a carnivore community that an A1C or a fasted blood glucose at that level, so long as it doesn't go up, down, so long as it's stable at that level, is there any evidence that that is problematic? Other than some markers, which are basically a bunch of tosh and nonsense.
they're not a bunch of tosh and nonsense, though, Bart.
Well, we've just dealt with LDL, haven't we? And that absolutely is, without any question whatsoever.
I
We've
disagree.
just thrown,
I mean, LDL,
well,
yes.
you may well
Small dense
disagree, but
LDL, no.
you did absolutely concede to me that there's not a scrap of evidence to support the lipid hypothesis, didn't you?
No, I said there's no randomized control trials that shows that, agreed with you, there's no randomized control trials that show small dense LDL as a risk factor for cardiovascular disease.
Right,
But
well,
there's a
what you
very
said,
strong
exactly.
association.
No, there isn't.
But we can say this. We
Suresh.
can say
No, there
exactly the
isn't.
same for high blood pressure. We can say exactly the same for smoking. We can say exactly the same for diabetes. We know
So are you
these are massive
suggesting
risk
that
factors.
the level
but there's
of
no
risk
RCTs.
associated with smoking
not.
is anything similar to any of the risks associated with any of the
No.
lipid profiles? No. Okay, so that's ridiculous,
I'm not.
isn't it?
No, it's not ridiculous because you're
Of course it's
saying that
ridiculous.
there's no.
Are you saying
You're
that
saying there's no link.
11,800% increase in risk per pack year of smoking is anything remotely similar to what they're reporting
No,
for
I'm
associations
not.
with any of the lipoproteins? No. Okay, good. I'm glad
not.
you're not supporting, because that would
But
be absolutely
you're-
beyond a joke.
Of course it would be. But
Right.
you're saying that there's no increased risk, or suggesting that there's no increased risk because there's no RCTs, there's no definitive proof. But there's no RCTs for any of these things.
No.
I
I'm
think that's what
saying
you're
that
suggesting.
No, I'm saying to you, Suresh, very clearly that risk, the term risk, the use of the word risk, demands absolutely that that is a cause and effect statement.
So why do we say that diabetes is a risk for heart disease?
A risk? I don't say that personally.
You just
I
said,
say-
well, why does it say smoking? You said there's an 11,800% increased risk.
No, incidence of
Is there an RCT?
of lung cancer per pack year of smoking. It's 11,800% increase in the incidence of lung cancer. That's
So
a
you're
pretty
saying that
large
smoking
incidence
doesn't
change, isn't it?
increase the risk? It is, but are you saying that smoking
I'm
doesn't
not
increase
making
the
any
risk then?
statement about risk, Suresh, because I'm a disciplined
but can
scientist.
you see how? Can you see how that sounds, though, Bart? I don't mean to be argumentative, but
well, you are being argumentative, Suresh.
I am.
And what you are suggesting is that I'm saying something I am not saying. What I'm saying to you is the use of the word risk when we're talking about prospects for people is entirely ill-disciplined and inappropriate scientifically. And I'm explaining that to you, if you'll allow me to finish, by saying that risk demands cause and effect. Sans the
Okay.
evidence for cause and effect, the use of the term risk is inappropriate. Absolutely.
Fine,
It's
okay.
ill-disciplined and it's out with science.
okay.
So we can
Let's
talk
carry
about
on.
incidence. And the incidence of heart disease as that relates to any of the lipoproteins or cholesterol or any subfraction or any density or any size particles, they are all absolutely minuscule. They are all completely within signal to noise ratio and as such of no utility for any one given living human being over a 100-year lifespan. That's what the statistics tell us, those of us that understand statistical inference. Those of us who have been a professor of health science for 20 years and have dealt with statistical analyses more times than most people have had hot feeds. So that's what I'm telling you is a fact about that.
Right, okay.
So that gets that one dealt with. There are no established risk factors. That is an inappropriate terminology which is used inappropriately by some people in the fraternity, for want of a better term, of science, those who are actually ill-disciplined, a bit pseudoscientific, or at least, if they're not doing it with malice aforethought, somewhat incompetent, and it should stop.
How would you then say that diabetes is associated, incidence or otherwise, with heart disease risk?
Again, you just used that word again, didn't you?
Okay,
Risk.
well, let's take out risk.
Right.
Why do we see this association?
Okay. The association between diabetes and heart disease seems to me, as someone who's also worked in the field of cardiovascular pathophysiology for more than a decade, out of my 2-decade academic career, which also took in other topics at other times, what I would suggest to you is that the very likely, in my professional opinion, the very likely underpinning etiology of both type 2 diabetes and atherosclerosis includes chronic systemic inflammation. So we have a spurious correlation between two factors that are both actually underpinned by something different. In the same way as the shark attack ice cream analogy, or the shark attack sunburn analogy, or the drownings in swimming pools as that relates to the release of movies by Nicolas Cage, although that one might have some causal artifact, I think.
But if we look at, for example, the Women's Health Study, inflammation was actually a very low hazard ratio. Whereas diabetes, of course, was a lot higher. I think at some point,
and when you say
I understand what you're
how are you
saying
determining
about
inflammation?
risk. I would have to go through the Women's Health Study to double check. I believe they looked at inflammatory markers. I'm not 100% on that.
Right, so markers of inflammation, some of which may or may not be particularly good. Right, okay.
But
also,
at some point, I think
you're talking
we need to
about a
establish that
population.
risk.
You're talking about a specialised population of people working in a specific industry only, of a specific gender only, and of a specific age range only. Ergo,
I think it's likely to be applicable to most people, though.
Well, that's
I think it's likely to be.
It's not underpinned. It's not underpinned by evidence that is so.
Okay, but to come back to what you said, Bart, at some point you have to take a leap of faith.
Right? Unless
I don't
the leap of
see
faith
how
that I choose to take in my professional opinion doesn't align with your opinion, in which case it's no good. Is that what we're saying?
What's good for the goose is good for the gander, I think, at some point,
Absolutely.
Bart,
Yeah. However, the difference is I use correct discipline and I say, well, look, this is my professional opinion based on significant experience in this field and experience as a well-published scientist in my own right.
And I'm doing the same.
Yeah, but I don't use words like risk inappropriately.
Fine, okay.
So I guess that's the difference there.
Okay.
Now, you have said that all these markers that you spoke about are all good and valid in some way, and I'm said, well, in my professional opinion, I disagree entirely. Definitely on the LDL one, which we've dealt with.
Fine.
The A1C is questionable, very questionable, as we've discussed. Its actual correlation with values of actual blood glucose are also very questionable. Furthermore, there is no evidence whatsoever that an average blood glucose value, if it was stable at even 6, is problematic, which you've agreed to.
No, I don't. I haven't agreed to that. No, I think there is actually. If you look at someone with pre-diabetes,
you'd better justify that with some pretty good science, then.
Yeah, I mean, if you just look at people with pre-diabetes, borderline diabetes, A1C of 5.7 or 6%, they have a very strong association with all sorts of metabolic problems, all sorts of other issues as well.
Which issues would that be, Suresh? No, hang on. Which issues would that be?
Yeah. Well, they can start to obviously get weight gain, increased cardiovascular disease, increased risk of cancers, metabolic dysfunction, fatty liver, all sorts of these other conditions.
Fantastic.
High blood
Is that
pressure
also true in a carnivore? Is that also true in a carnivore population?
Of the carnivores, zero-carb carnivores that I have seen with A1C going up, yes. They are starting to get signs of metabolic dysfunction.
Are there any published data to support your claim at this time?
No. Are there any published data to
that's
support
the
your
answer to
claim?
the question then. Thank you very much. I'm not.
No, you
I'm
can't
not
have it both
making
ways,
claims.
Bart.
Well,
You
I
can't have
actually
it both ways.
I actually
You can't
can.
say that.
I'm asking you
you
whether
can't
there's
say
any
that
evidence.
glucose going up is fine when it's not been published.
Again,
you can't
you
say
are
that.
misquoting me. I
you
did
know.
not say it's fine at any time. I never said it's fine. I asked you whether there was
But
any evidence it is not fine.
That's the null
That is
hypothesis.
not the same question. Well,
The null
who gets to
hypothesis-
determine what the hypotheses are, Suresh? Who
Because
decides
this
what
has
the
been
hypotheses
widely
are?
held for a long time. This is
So
the null
appeal
hypothesis.
to consensus fallacy. I see. Good. Okay. Right. Right. Well, we've dealt with that. So let's now move on to the triglycerides issue.
Okay.
Are you familiar with the study of N equals 385,000 MI patients within 24 hours of their MI, where they looked at the value of triglycerides in those patients who had
I'm
presented
not.
to a hospital ER? Okay, I'll give you what the thing was. If triglycerides were a valid marker of risk, to use that naughty, naughty word, what would you expect to see when you look at those 385,000 people's triglyceride levels? What kind of graph would you see in terms of what's going on with them?
You said they were admitted within 24 hours of being admitted with an MI.
Yes.
Yeah, it's probably going to be changed. It's not going to be what it's going to be.
Changed from what?
From a long time. Off the top of my head, it would probably go down. There's going to be disruption. I mean, triglycerides can change on a dime. It doesn't mean that's what it's been doing for their whole life.
Right. So there's no area under the curve assessment whatsoever. Is that what you're suggesting?
No, what I'm saying is that triglycerides can change very quickly. So doing a single one-off measurement with a patient on a triglyceride level that's high post-MI, when there's been a sudden massive change in the body, may not be overly useful. Now, I know you're going to say, well, hang on, you're just doing a one-off assessment with patients and triglycerides and saying it's important.
Right.
But these patients haven't just had an MI. And these are multiple, series pathologies with it getting worse over time, going up
Okay, so
over time,
what
I should say.
pathologies are we talking about? Because markers are not
Blood tests,
pathologies,
I mean.
Suresh.
I mean, blood tests.
Right, so markers.
But I'm saying, things like...
not actual symptomatic
well, blood
pathology.
pressure starts to go up. Blood pressure starts to go up.
Okay, so blood
They
pressure
start
is a
to feel
symptomatic pathology, absolutely.
more stress, more anxiety. They start to get lower libido. They start to get sleep problems. All of these things start to creep in with blood tests suggesting a picture of a metabolic dysfunction and a stress response. That's what I've seen on my patients.
And in your experience
Correct.
and in your professional opinion of markers.
Yes.
Right, okay.
And combined with the symptomology.
Let's get back to the question about what would you expect to see in a population of 385,000 people who have had a demonstrated MI in the last 24 hours if triglycerides were a valid marker of risk, to use that word.
Well, when you have an MI, the triglycerides are probably going to go down.
Down from
24
what?
hours of an MI, well,
Same
down from
question,
higher.
Down from what?
I mean, I would imagine they would probably be quite high for most people, but triglycerides, we know, are not super strongly associated, but there is an association. It's not as strongly associated as, say, diabetes, for example, or high blood
So
pressure.
would it surprise you to hear then that the triglyceride levels of those 385,000 people showed a normal distribution at the population average?
No, it wouldn't surprise me at all.
Right, okay, so
But
that's
that
not really
doesn't
going to be
say
very
what-
good as a risk factor for anything, is it then?
Well, no, I disagree, because it doesn't show you what they've been
on
doing
what
for their whole
basis,
life.
Suresh? For goodness sake, I've just dismissed it for you, surely.
On the basis, it's just a single one-off result, and it doesn't show you what's been happening for their whole life. With their triglyceride levels, potentially most of their life. We don't know. A
But
single
you've
one-off
just
result
you've just
is
tripped
not
yourself
overly
up on
useful.
that one before by admitting that you're doing the same thing by taking a one-off test of their triglyceride and saying that's a problem.
No, I'm not doing one-off tests. I'm doing serial tests for patients and showing that it's going up over time.
So are you able to show us or publish somewhere a case series where you can do a decent
In
area
the process,
under the curve of
trying.
assessment? Okay, what's the
In
issue
the
with getting
process and
that part
trying.
there?
The issue is time, honestly, Bart. It's I've never wrote a paper, admittedly, and it's getting these things done. It's time. It's auditing my work properly. The other part is, and I know you're going to criticize, of course, here. And look, these are anecdotes. These are not randomized control trials. It's having a population that is, essentially kind of enough data to actually say, well, this is actually potentially a concern, rather than, of course, someone like you picking it all apart. So I've got to go through. It takes time, of course, you know that, to actually look at what I can potentially publish. Time is the biggest factor. I've got 4 kids, I'm busy, and it's very hard.
Oh, we're all busy. We've all got other things on. I've got a farm to run and a YouTube empire to try and keep going. I've got, the product range that I stand behind to promote. We've all got lots of things on. At the end of the day, what you have suggested, or what it seems to me that you have suggested, is that in your experience with X number of patients, whatever the N number is there, that you think every single person that presents to you on a strict 100% carnivore diet has blood markers, which in your professional opinion are aberrant, to which my response is, according to whom, other than yourself, on the basis of what? And you can say, well, consensus authority, to which I'll say, well, consensus authority fallacy, and I'll ask you for any cause and effect inference that what you're suggesting is establishable, i.e. these people are at elevated risk of anything whatsoever, and you've admitted to me that there is no evidence to support that claim. Is that accurate? And whatever,
yes,
I've been a bit jarring, which you knew I was going to be. I haven't given you the grumpy professor act. I haven't given you the swearing at you and all that carry on, because I said
no,
I
you
wouldn't
have not.
do.
No, you have not.
And that's because you're a decent bloke whose heart's in the right place, trying to do the right thing. But what I am going to do, because that's what I do, is educate my viewership and everybody else's viewership who wants to watch this as to the disciplines of science, as to the requirements to remain within those disciplines, as to the requirement to moderate the way we communicate with our patients, our clients, the general public, or anyone that watches our YouTube channel, so that what we actually say, not what we are being accused of saying, Suresh, but what we actually say is unassailable.
I agree.
And what I have actually said is, great, you've given us an opinion. You're welcome to it. Opinions are, of course, a lot like anal orifices, aren't they? In that almost everybody's got one, and it's almost certainly full of shit.
And we don't
However,
really want to see or hear from it.
What you haven't been able to do, because I knew you wouldn't be able to, is provide any evidence that a person who eats a 100% carnivore diet, whose A1C and or fasting glucose drifts up to around about the level of around about 5.8, 5.9, or even 6, there is no indication there of risk of any pathology at any time for that individual or any other group of individuals, actually, because the data to underpin that claim does not exist.
To use your definition of risk? Correct. To use a more standardized definition of risk? Yeah, it is. That's what you're saying.
So appeal to a consensus.
To use, fine, okay, we'll call it that. But to use a more consensus, opinion of risk, yes, I would bring it back to you, Bart. And I think this has been a useful discussion. And look, I've learned, I think, some things from today. Hopefully, your viewers have as well. I think, it comes back to, for me, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And I think if you're saying, we know that things like diabetes, for example, there's a huge increased risk with heart disease. We know this is true. Whatever semantics we want to use.
I won't have that.
There's a huge increase in risk.
I will not have it. Risk is not the right word. Incidence, retrospectively, in the populations who have been assessed in the past under the circumstances that those people lived with their genes, with no controls of any kind, you cannot extrapolate a study in one population to another.
No, but to say that there's no increase in risk because there's never been a study, there's never been a randomized control trial that's looked at diabetes and heart disease, smoking, and heart disease. Okay, a randomized
you're
control
deflecting
trial.
Again, Suresh, and I'm going to stop you because you're deflecting again.
Fine.
The point at moot here is the inappropriate use of the word risk. Risk is not the appropriate word. The concept that you're trying to get across may or may not be valid, in that in the past, in a population of people who have already been assessed for a period of time, there was a known incidence rate, there was a known association between this factor and that factor, There was a Pearson product moment correlation that could be calculated. There was an R-squared value that could be calculated from that around that correlation to give us some idea of its veracity, meaning and utility in those people at that time. What we cannot do is use that data to impose a statement about risk on any other population going forward from that point in time, and certainly absolutely not to any one given individual. Because that is out with the disciplines of science. Please do. Yes, go.
Can I ask you a couple of follow-up questions then, Bart, if I may?
Yeah, of course.
What do you think about then people saying that A1C going up on carnivore and glucose going up on carnivore is perfectly fine?
I would say there's no evidence to support that claim. Any more than there's any evidence to support the claim that it's not.
Why do you think that we don't see this on keto or relaxed carnivore?
Well,
why do you think we only see it on zero carb? Just because I want to learn here from you as well.
What you're
do you
talking
think?
about is what you've seen.
Okay, fine.
Okay, so the one thing that we started to talk about before we got off track and started talking about risk again was that there are a number of potential explanations for any one given individual's response, or indeed any response of any subpopulation at large. And we talked about A1C and erythrocyte lifespan or potential lifespan issues as one potential explanation that cannot be dismissed nor confirmed at this point. Mm-hmm. We can speak about the potential that a number of individuals experiencing this response may well be consuming too much protein for them under the circumstances that they're in at that time. That cannot be dismissed. And I could go on all day about a number of other potential explanations as well, including the likelihood that if you're consuming some carbohydrate, that the drive to consume protein may well be dropped as well, which may well also have a knock-on effect. There may be an additive effect because, well, we have confounds, covariates, and collinearities going on. What I'm suggesting is what I've always suggested, and that is that human nutrition science, and I always give it that, does not exist, Suresh.
True.
What we have is a ring-fenced area of ideology based on consensus fallacy, based on financial conflict of interest, and a bunch of other factors, including things like publication bias, which is a basic statistical issue, as well as a conduct of science issue, i.e. null results don't get published. They end up in the bottom filing drawers, and then when you do a funnel plot on a meta-analysis, you go, oh, look, publication bias, invalid result, for example.
Garbage in, garbage out.
We have a bunch of clowns running around suggesting that epidemiology is science, and I refer specifically to health science epidemiology and nutrition epidemiology, because it's not science, it's not remotely akin to science. In fact, it's one of the furthest things from science I've ever seen, actually. And then we have statistical skullduggery like adjustment, which don't even get me started on, because that's fabrication, absolute fabrication. You have
issues with adjusting.
I don't have issues with it. I state outright that it's fabrication. It's not science. Personally, there is no justification for using it. None at all.
I don't understand how they kind of. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I'm not a scientist. I don't truly understand these things, but I don't really understand how saying, well, these people have all these issues, let's just take all these issues out and then see what happens. It doesn't really make any sense to me overly, but anyway.
Well, it's impossible. It cannot be done. You cannot get fully formed eggs out of a baked cake. There's no way. And if you understand, like anyone that's done even more than 3 minutes of scientific training, that a single variate regression is unable to inform on causality, then you must understand that a multivariate regression is similarly unable, because it's just a bunch of single variate regressions imposed one upon the other without any statement around cause and effect of any one of them or their contributory factors. It's just garbage. So I'm glad that we're at least, on the same page with respect to that. And I actually don't think, Suresh, that you and I are that far apart on many things. Obviously, the conduct of this discussion is around making it interesting for folks. And while I'm not playing the character, while I'm not swearing at you and carrying on, I did want to be very, very clear with you that your opinion around the drifting up of A1C and 100% carnivores is just that. It's an opinion, and you're entitled to it. It's not one I share. I don't personally believe, it is my opinion, that this is not an indication of any serious risk of anything in any given individual at all. However, I'm remaining disciplined and saying, I'm not saying it is or it is not. I'm saying that absolutely the unassailable position is that there is no evidence that it is problematic in any way, to which you can and have retorted with, well, there's no evidence it isn't either. And that puts us on the same page. Now we've both said, there you go, there's no science here. And that's okay.
I think we probably agree on more than we disagree on.
Yes, and we also agree on the fact that there is no need, absolutely need, to be 100% carb-free in terms of exogenous carbohydrates. I don't believe that there's any need for that either.
I don't think there is.
What I do know for a fact, and what you've confirmed, is that the need physiologically for any whatsoever is none. And we've also agreed that Paul Salad, I don't know, pouring hundreds of grams of the stuff down his stupid neck every day of his life is contraindicated, have we not?
Yes, probably not a good idea.
Right, good. Okay, so I mean, I guess that was what I wanted to get out of today. Was that about an hour? I thought it might be an hour or about 90 minutes, depending on what's what. What else did you want to say? What else should we talk about? Should we deal with some questions in a collegial fashion before we finish off?
We certainly can.
Right, because I did mark a few out earlier, and there's probably a few more that have come through since. Let's hope my markings of starring questions haven't disappeared. Okay, here we go. Is it possible that low folate on carnivore could impair red blood cell formulation and artificially affect the A1C? What's your view on that?
Certainly, low folate on carnivore is a very common thing that we see. Absolutely. Folate in meat is almost, it's very low, basically. Higher in organ meats, though a lot of people are not eating those. Eggs, pretty good folate, of course, but a lot of people are not eating tons of eggs. And low folate will impair red blood cell production, that's for sure. I don't know how that would affect A1C, because I'm not aware if there's any evidence to suggest that red blood cells not being produced as much would make red blood cells live longer, which could potentially affect A1C. So I don't think that would affect it in any way, but I'm not 100%.
Or, I guess the other potential thing that I'm just thinking about now is if you have impaired ability to produce red cells, ergo you might have a lowered red cell count, then each individual red cell may well be exposed to more glucose, and ergo there could be the inverse to what we're suggesting, or what you're suggesting there potentially as well. I guess we'd both be speculating a bit on that, which is, again, what we're here to do. We're all here to speculate a bit.
Yeah.
I would also add to that, any question of that kind, I would also say, well, low folate, according to whom, on the basis of what? Because normative values are not necessarily ideal values, are they?
They're not. That's an interesting point, though, and again, maybe you'll criticize me for this, but what I've seen with patients on the carnivore diet, strict kind of zero carb carnivore. When I say carnivore, that's what I'm talking about here. Folate dropping, and I kind of refer to it with patients as a functional folate level, not just looking at the absolute values. Interestingly, what I've seen is often a rise in homocysteine level going up. So when homocysteine is going up, that does, to me, suggest a functional folate deficiency. And then when folate comes up, then homocysteine comes down. That suggests that the folate levels were actually low for the body. And that's, I have observed that at times, with the carnivore diet.
I'm just looking at my piece of paper, and there's one more note of one thing I wanted to discuss with you based on your opening gambit that I forgot about. You spoke about stress markers, stress hormones, etc. Number one, I don't actually buy the label stress hormone. I think, it's a hormone, whatever you're talking about. Stress is a value judgment statement. Science is empirically litigated. But that said, let's say they are markers of stress, these stress hormones. My question would be, is stress contraindicated?
Acute stress? No.
No, of course not, because
chronic stress,
the situation.
Yeah.
If you have zero stress, what's the situation? Well, you're dead.
Well, you're probably dead.
Yes, exactly. See, we are on the same page. Awesome.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so distress is what we're trying to avoid. So markers of stress may not be markers of distress.
Correct. So
even without
this
the
is
argument
where,
about the specific markers that you proposed, that
Fine.
some of
Yes.
which I poo-pooed absolutely, and some of which I said, well, they're questionable. Okay, cool. Sorry, I just thought we should close off that, make sure I've covered off all my notes. There they are. All right, good. Kelly says, I've been keto since 2018 and my A1C has gone from 5.2 to 5.7. I eat 30 total carbs. Why? I think we've covered that. I think that's what the whole discussion was about. The answer is neither one of us can tell you for sure. We can both speculate. What neither one of us can tell you is whether that's a problem or not, I guess, is the answer. I guess what we need is a large number of long-term anecdotes, and we're starting to get a larger and larger cohort of people who do claim, at least, to be 100% carnivore, some of whom claim to have been so for multiple decades, and the lack of any, I guess, really significant reports of large numbers of people suffering pathologies, dropping dead or growing a new head or anything like that would seem to purport or support the idea that it may not necessarily be. Of course, everything's individual, isn't it? You might have perfect bloods and drop dead.
Correct.
Any minute,
Absolutely.
in fact. I don't want to worry any of you, but that could happen. You might also have the worst bloods, the worst markers of stress in the world, and, outlive anybody, I guess. It's possible because, well, N equals 1, isn't it? Haley says, carnivore almost a year. My A1C is 5.7. My insulin is 5.6. I'm not the least bit concerned. Okay, cool. I mean, we didn't even get into insulin and so-called insulin resistance and the whole, nature of that thing as a construct. And, we could do that another day if you like, Suresh.
We can. If you like. I think I would agree with you, though. I don't think we would butt heads on that, actually.
Okay.
I agree
well, that
with
wouldn't
you.
be much fun to watch, would it, if we don't?
It wouldn't. No, it wouldn't. But
yeah. I mean,
insulin's a marker. It's a single marker.
Yes.
Insulin's just a single marker. That's
right. Just
that's
like
it.
any other of the markers that you proposed to me
Correct.
earlier, Suresh. Right. Good. Okay. Thank you. Thanks for that. All right. Of course, you can put all the markers together and say, well, there's a package of markers that may or may not infer a potential problem, which you did, and I've said, okay, fine, to that. What I have absolutely objected to, just to make it clear once again, is the use of the word risk, because it's a cause and effect statement necessarily, and we don't have that data. Look, I mean, the reason for this discussion, really, other than because it's a great discussion, and I knew it would be, educational for everybody, and I knew it would be, great fun because you're a top bloke, you really are.
Thank you.
But I was very concerned because, and it may not have been your fault, I was concerned because the information that Bradley presented in Adelaide was an edited version of a discussion you had, and there was just points which made it look like you were saying absolutely everybody in the world who eats 100% carnivore will be diabetic because someone who has an A1C above 5.7 or 6 is a diabetic. That's what it looked like you said. That's why I said, hey, I don't think...
Certainly don't think I ever said that. So, no.
Well, you did in the edited version of what you said. That's why I object to people editing what I've said. Because that's not what I said. Yeah, and that's why I sort of said, right, we better actually give you the opportunity to put your side forward, put your case forward. And I think you've actually did a really great job, Suresh. I really do.
I appreciate that. It's
while
stressful.
everyone's going, no, of course. But actually, I think you did a great job. I really do.
Yeah.
So there's that, for what it's worth.
I appreciate that, but I do appreciate you saying that. And look, admittedly, I am not a scientist. I don't do papers. I don't do all this research. But, I just like to approach it all from a patient perspective and just, trying to do the best for my patients. That's really, at the end of the day, I think that's what we're all trying to do.
Of course. Yes, of course. All right. So that was the reason for it, really. Any more questions, folks, before we let Suresh get on with his day? Please, yes.
Can I ask you? I actually have a day off today. It's never a day off, but I actually don't have anything.
Okay.
But
Oh,
people
good.
do have to
Then
leave
you're
at
not
some
on leave.
point. But do you mind if I ask you a quick question, not related to this really at all? And I don't know if you've seen this. I'll send you. I don't know if I can do a screen share on my side, but I can put it in the private chat. This thing about I saw Dr. Ids. I don't know if you know Dr.
God, Dr. Idziot. Dr. Idziot. Yeah, go on.
I thought you may have heard of him, and I saw one of his things on Facebook. Coming up. How do I do a share screen?
If you press the present button, I may have to. There it is. I can put it up. Poof,
that is. So I don't know if you've seen this. This was the study he was citing, this specification curve analysis to red meat in all-cause mortality.
Right.
So he was kind of made this video saying that, carnivore influencers are basically using this study to show that red meat, lowers the risk of all-cause mortality. And it doesn't do that and blah, 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 whatever. But I think this is an interesting paper to look at. What we were talking about earlier with just the analyses, how you do with the analyses and, biases and adjustments and all this kind of thing. And I don't know what your thoughts on this specification curve analysis are, but, in essence, they took this NHANES data, 22,000 patients, and basically put it through about 1,400 different, versions of the analysis. And everyone came out with a different response, basically.
Right.
And show different results from the same data.
Right. Okay. It's another form of what is ostensibly a multivariate regression analysis technique. It is an attempt to pull the wool over the readership's eyes and the editorship's eyes of journals to falsely claim that they are able to determine how much different factors have contributed to a hard-baked outcome in some way. A task that is absolutely, completely and utterly impossible statistically, logically, or ethically. This is another example of not even pseudoscience, this is anti-science because it purports to be science and it's nothing of the sort. It's not remotely related to it. The situation with regards to red meat and mortality is there is no extant evidence anywhere in the literature, and there never will be, that the consumption of any amount of red meat is or is not causal in the development of any disease process in any group of individuals, let alone any individual. It's rubbish. It's not science. That's my take on it. It's just utter postulous garbage.
Your take on this specification curve analysis is that it's garbage, or this paper specifically. Okay, interesting.
Yeah,
interesting.
Absolute garbage.
Do you not think it serves to highlight the potential biases, though, in the analytical methods that researchers actually use to present the data, though? And I guess my follow-on question from that is, what if this is garbage and looking at lots of different ways to analyze the data, which is the correct way to analyze the data? And how do we know that?
Well, it depends on which data you're talking about. If you're talking about the incidence of mortality retrospectively in a group of people drawn at random or otherwise from any given population, the correct way to interpret it is that's what happened in those people at that time under those circumstances, period. As soon as you then put a comma after that, strike the period and put a comma and say, and therefore we can project what will happen in another group of people at another time under different circumstances, that's where you've crossed the line and you've lost your scientific discipline and you're out with the science. The tendency, the desire to want to do that, to say, and so therefore there's a utility in this, I understand why there is a desire to do that. What I'm saying is it is entirely out with science. It's entirely inappropriate. There is no justification for it, none at all. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. But however, what you're suggesting as well isn't, someone that was a bit educated on statistics, scientific methods and all of that wanted to use a paper like this to pick holes in what this paper's done. Well, I've done that many times with these kind of studies on my channel. So yes, it has, I guess the utility, if there is a utility, is in people who understand what has been done and why it's nonsense, to make videos explaining to people why it's nonsense. Well, I guess then it serves some purpose if we want to make a silver lining out of what's basically a cloud of nonsense, I guess.
Yeah, fair enough.
All right. Anything else today, or?
No, I think I'm good. There was a question about dopamine. I don't know if you wanted to talk about that.
Okay, absolutely.
But that's a different topic. But
you can absolutely talk about dopamine.
yeah, I mean, I with carnivore diet, I always try and approach things from first principles because, of course, we know there's really no research into it. And so it fascinated me from the start, why on the carnivore diet, what is it about carnivore diet that seems to help people with addictions, smoking, gambling, gaming. My gaming addiction, it definitely helped me with that. Food addiction, sugar addiction, it definitely helped me with that as well.
Yeah.
And I suspect, again, I have no way to prove it, unfortunately, but I suspect it's a dopamine pathway issue. And that's, I think, the big difference between keto and, say, carnivore is all those keto treats and, sweet things and desserts and keto cakes and all those things that I certainly used to do to try and get around, the loophole, basically, of no sugars, artificial sweeteners, and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Whereas the carnivores are typically taking all of that stuff out. And so I think that leads to a very low dopamine state, which incidentally maybe how it seems to help with things like ADHD as well, potentially. So I think it's an interesting observation. I've definitely seen it with my patients. I've seen it with myself. This is fairly widely reported as well, that it helps with these addictive behaviors. And we just don't know why. I suspect it's a dopamine thing. I don't know what your thoughts, if you have any on that, are.
Yeah, I guess what's going through my mind as you're speaking is that any different from saying you felt a bit better when you added 30 or 40 grams of carbs back in? Because that could be a dopamine response too, couldn't it?
It could be. Yeah, it's possible.
I mean, certainly if you poured 400 and 500 and 600 grams of carbs down your neck every single day of your stupid life, that would definitely be something that you could probably say, I think that's probably pretty much an addictive behaviour. I think that's probably based in dopamine. Because, I mean, people often say that kind of things to me. And I usually respond by saying, well, look, there are some things that we can do as human beings that might make us feel better that are not necessarily good for our health ongoingly, despite what some markers in our blood might say, which probably don't give us much information of utility, as we've litigated, I think, to death today already. For instance, I always feel somewhat better, at least short term, when I drink too much alcohol and or masturbate furiously. They're both things that are great for me.
You get banned off YouTube for saying that.
Could you? I mean, if I was going to get banned off YouTube, and I may well at some point still, it's probably not for saying masturbating. Well,
I don't know, but yeah, I mean, obviously, I think the dopamine side's an interesting take, and I think that's probably how it helps with the addiction sides.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, again, if you wanted to talk to someone who specialises in addictive behaviour and specifically food addiction, or at least used to before she decided to give that up to become a farmer, you might talk to my lovely partner Pim. That's her thing. I'm not really an expert in that. I tell you what I am an expert in, though, breaking the tension with a bit of humour. That's something I've always been pretty good at. No, okay, great. I think we've covered it off. I think you did a great job, as I said. I thank you very much for your valuable time and your willingness to front up to, whatever level of the character that you were going to, I guess. I mean, I did try and reassure you that I was going to keep it under control, and I think I did.
I think you did. You were very nice. You were very friendly, Bart. And I feel like this has been a useful discussion for me. Hopefully, it's been a useful discussion for everybody watching as well.
Yes, I hope so too. That's why we're doing it, other than for the clicks and that, and so that you can all go and buy the sponsor's product, which is advertised at the bottom of the screen, has been the whole thing. Also, just to remind folks, anyone that wants to come and visit the independent sovereign nation of Pimbatia, that's the farm that Pim and I have bought. We have 40 acres here in the beautiful Tasman district of New Zealand. It's green, it's lush, it's unbelievably beautiful. We have cows, we have sheep, we have goats, we have ducks and chickens, and jobs to do on the farm. So what we thought was, why don't some of you come and stay with us for a bit? We'll put you up, we'll feed you, give us 20 hours of farm labour, and go and do some other things while you're here, because there's plenty to do around the region. I think that's a win-win for everybody. Send us an email and we'll vet you. You'll have to get past Ted. Ted will be the arbiter of whether you're an acceptable visitor or not. And he's a hard taskmaster, as Ted. But that's on offer as well. So that, and also the hardcore carnivore formulations of this oral product, which the company have happily made available to those in the Australian and New Zealand markets as a test. So if you don't support it, everybody else in the world will be knocking on your door saying, we wanted that, and you fuckers didn't buy it. So it went away. So don't let that happen. Go and order it. It'll be there next week at your doorstep. It's great stuff. It's exactly like the existing Stem Enhance, except the capsule is not cellulose, it's bovine gel, and the flow agent is not a rice starch, it's silica. Cool. 100% carnivore. Right. See you then. Thanks once again, Suresh. Thanks again for your time. I really do appreciate it. And
Thank you.
Yeah, let's talk again. That was fun.
It was.
Ciao. Right. See you then. All right, all that remains is for me to sing you out with the national anthem of Pimbatia, which, as we all know, goes a little bit something like this. Steak and eggs and steak. That's what you should have for your breakfast. Delicious. Eggs and steak and steak and eggs. Just making sure you heard. Yes, I think they did get it, Ted. Good. All right. See you next time, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, and super intelligent shades of the colour green. Bye for now.